Welcome to the MCAT Basics Podcast, brought to you by the physicians at Med School Coach. Each week, Sam Smith breaks down high-yield MCAT topics so you can score as high as possible on test day.
I was recently interviewed on a podcast that is in the Med School Coach network called the Prospective Doctor Podcast, and I talked about being a successful reapplicant. I just shared some tips and some of the things I learned in being a reapplicant and just about the med school application process in general. And I hope those tips will not only benefit people who are reapplying this cycle, but also people who are applying for the first time. So I hope you guys find this information helpful. And it helps some of you out there who are maybe reapplicants or just don't really understand the application process all that well. And with all that said, I will be back next Monday with a brand new episode on the respiratory system.
Sam, do you want to tell the audience members who may not have listened to MCAT Basics or know who you are a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah, of course. And I appreciate that introduction. So I started this MCAT Basics podcast, I think it was about 3 years ago now. And it's really grown pretty big from what I ever thought it would be in what it started out as in the beginning. I just started it in my garage as kind of, a fun little side project, a little hobby that I was doing. And they're like, I record about hour-long lectures on just different MCAT topics. And, students, I think I've found it helpful for the most part. And it's something that I've loved doing. And I've actually been doing it pretty much full time now for the past year, which is just insane. I would have never thought that, talking in front of a microphone I would be doing for a job, but it's been fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, times have definitely changed, and there are so many different things out there that people can do, even with a passion of medicine like we both have, where you can work on your other skill sets and kind of explore those things. So it's super interesting, and I'm sure that all of the listeners out there who have listened to MCAT Basics definitely appreciate you, because I know I hate to say like way back when, but when I was in school, we did not have a podcast at all. So this is definitely a resource for people in kind of hitting on different learning styles.
Definitely.
So we have some exciting news. You recently successfully got some invitations to join medical school this year after the process. So we want to dive deeply into that experience for the listeners who may be going through that process next year or in the fall. So I want to start by kind of asking a question you've probably heard on a lot of interviews, to be honest, but what made you decide to enter the field of medicine?
So I originally actually was studying engineering in undergrad, and that's the direction I thought I wanted to go. But I had this opportunity one summer to work in an emergency room, and my mom has been a wound care nurse her whole life. And so I had that seed kind of planted in my head of, medicine might be a way I wanted to go. And I had that internship, and I really just loved it. And I was kind of, energized by the experience in going in and being able to talk to people. And that's kind of what shifted me towards a career in medicine, was just that face-to-face interaction. My twin brother, I have a twin brother. I don't know if many people know that, just listening to my podcast. I have a twin brother. He studied chemical engineering as well. And he actually went into the field. And I don't mean to talk down about engineering, because it's a great career and a lot of people love it. But he works with big metal tanks all day. I mean, he just is modeling fluid flow through these tanks in doing math related to the reactions that are going on in these tanks. And to me, I just don't think I would find that as fulfilling, as working with people and trying to, heal people. And so that was kind of why I went into medicine, was really just because of that face-to-face interaction and being able to, heal people and really help people. That sounds very cliche.
No,
it sounds extremely
cliche. It does sound cliche, but it's honest and true. Like, we all have different thoughts about what our future holds. So you and your brother, obviously, you're twins. Shame on you for not mentioning that to me before. But you spent your whole life together, so I'm sure there was some component of you both thinking that you wanted to do the same thing. But when you got there and you were experiencing it, you did it in undergrad, and you realized, hey, this isn't for me. It's time to pivot and figure out what I want to do. And that's one thing that I say to a lot of students in terms of joining medicine. A lot of people get stuck, especially with the typical personality of a medical student who's kind of type A. We kind of live by timelines and checklists and points and things like that, where I need to do this, then I need to do this, then I need to go to medical school. And life doesn't always work that way. So it's good to experience life and to figure out, like, hey, I'm trying this. I don't like it. My heart's still in medicine. Because I always tell the students, if there's anything you can think about besides being a doctor, do that first and then come back. Yeah. So that seems like what
I've heard that from people too. Yeah.
So true.
I've heard that advice.
Yeah, I've had a lot of my colleagues in med school. I went through a pathway program, so I kind of went straight through, but I kind of felt a little disadvantaged because when I got there, there were engineers, there were people who were bankers, there were people who did so many different things, and you can use those things that you learn kind of in your other life and apply it in a different way in medicine. So I think it is definitely an asset to try other stuff. So, this is not your first time applying to medical school, which is very common. It happens to, I'm not going to throw a percentage out there because then you guys are going to go and Google it, but a large majority of our students.
Fact check.
Yeah, don't fact check me.
Fact check false.
But this is not your first time. So can you tell us about your first time applying in the last cycle and what that was like and what happened?
Yeah, sure. So I applied, as you said, I applied in 2020, a year ago, and I didn't get in, and it really, really sucked. So just to give a little bit of background, and I want people, I'll try to be as open as possible here and just kind of, give people my stats and just show them where I'm at. So on the MCAT, I got a 513, and then my GPA was a 3.82. Now that might not mean a whole lot to you because I don't know, are you on an admissions committee?
Not now, and I will show my age right now and say that the MCATs were not scored in the hundreds when I was
right. It was like, was that when they're like, 32 or something was a good score?
So
right.
We didn't have hundreds, but yes.
Okay. So anyways, that's, it's a decent, it's a decent MCAT score. It's a decent GPA. It should be enough to get you into medical school. And so, my thoughts going into the application cycle were basically, I had a shot at every single program that had an average MCAT and average GPA that was in my range. And I think that's a lot of people's, thinking as you're going into a cycle is like, hey, I'm going to get so many interviews because I am at this, range or this average for these med schools. And, that's just not how it works. So that's something, right off the bat to just think about. And anyway, so I applied to 26 schools, and out of those 26 schools, I got 3 interviews. 2 of those 3 interviews were what's called the MMI format. I don't know if you're familiar with the multiple mini interview format, but those were very difficult. So basically in those, you're given a scenario or some type of question, and then you walk into like a room and you have to talk to this person who's just typing on their computer as you're talking. And you don't really get to see, you don't get to really see a person respond to you or be human. It's like you're talking to a computer, and it's just, I don't know. I don't really love I don't love how that works because, when you're talking to somebody, you can read their facial expressions, you can connect with them, and it just is not possible in MMI. So I had 2 MMI interviews. I was denied like right after the interviews. And then I had one that wasn't MMI, just, traditional sit down, get to know you. I was waitlisted there, and eventually, I was denied off the waitlist, and it sucked. Are you allowed to cuss on your podcast?
Yes. Show your
it felt like shit. I felt like shit because I had been working for 3 or 4 years to get to that goal of getting into med school, and so when you don't get in, it's like these thoughts start to come up like, did I, pick the right thing? Am I ever going to be able to get into med school? Maybe this is what's going to happen every single year. So I started having those thoughts, but eventually I kind of got to the point where I was more looking forward and started to think, okay, what can I do to improve my application?
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to just as many people as I could, put my application in front of as many people as I could, and got their feedback on things that I could improve on, and made those improvements. And I think I don't know if it worked, but I mean, I got into 3 medical schools this year, which is 3 more than the year before. So I think some of those improvements really did help. And part of what I want to do today is just talk about some of those things that I learned, and hopefully be able to help some students that are in the same position as me, or maybe just applying for the first time this year.
I appreciate your transparency, and I just want to take a step back. First, I think it's adorable that you just asked me, could you curse on the podcast, when you are my producer?
It's your podcast.
Listening out there, Sam could also bleep it out if he wants to change it.
That's a good point. I could do that.
But I love the transparency. And I think what you're saying is medical school is really competitive, and all of the students are amazing. So you've gotten to that point. You've done those practice tests. You've studied. You killed the MCAT. You have an amazing GPA. So sometimes they're not necessarily looking for those things that are expectations when you matriculate into medical school. And then to have certain different interviewing techniques that certain schools look like. If we're entering the field where we're supposed to value humanism, it's very difficult to prepare for something where there's no interaction. So I definitely understand that it was hard. It was rough. And like you said, it was shitty. So afterwards, the big key point to that is that you didn't sit there and sulk or give up and figure out like, okay, this isn't for me. I'm going to go figure something else out. You set your goal and you figured out how you could network and talk with as many people as you said that you did, review your application, see how you can improve it and boost it so that you can present yourself in the best way possible in the future. And I think that shows resilience, and it shows like how you will continue to persevere during the tough times in school, because I mentioned that I went straight through for school or whatever like that, but that doesn't mean that just because I went through straight for school that there weren't hiccups that definitely caused the same kinds of pivots. So like I wasn't that great at test taking, so I have stories for days we won't get into too much because this is your time to shine. But it's all about that pivoting and figuring out how to relentlessly improve yourself so that you can tackle it the next time. Now,
and I've noticed on a lot of your, I've noticed too on a lot of your podcasts, a lot of the doctors that you talk to really have had, points in their careers where they've had to overcome things, and, maybe it's not matching, it's not getting that fellowship that they wanted. There's so many different, I feel like, steps in a medical career to almost achieve. I don't know how to say that right, but there's so many different levels of times where you can, not match or not get the fellowship, where it does take that extra level of persevering. So I think that is definitely something that is important to have if you're interested in going into medicine.
Absolutely. And it's good that you're learning early, because there are definitely people who come in and they have, for instance, I had a very great close friend who came in and had really great scores, always rocked all the exams, always did such and such and such. And then they just knew they were a shoo-in, kind of like you kind of knew you were a shoo-in last year, and they didn't match. And everyone's like, what? Or when they took the step 2 CS, like they knew all of the things by the book, but it's kind of figuring out that way to also show your personality. Or on different rotations, there may be people who are very great surgeons, and they will be that, but they're not doing well with the family medicine component or the OBGYN component or something. So everyone isn't going to be the best at everything, but that's why you're entering school, to learn. So you're going to learn and grow and pick up different things from your colleagues and your friends and stuff. So it's definitely an opportunity for growth, and these life experiences that you experience will help you kind of apply that to the future.
Right. Yeah. Hey everybody, the Med School Coach content team is conducting a survey about this podcast, potential future materials, and your experience with the MCAT in general. And we'd love your feedback. Survey responses are going to be used to improve our MCAT offerings and make sure that we provide students with the most useful materials possible. The survey should take approximately 20 minutes, and the first 100 survey respondents will receive a $20 Amazon gift card via email within 72 hours of your submission. If you're not one of the first 100 to fill out the survey, you'll still receive a $5 gift card. To take the survey, go to the show notes and follow the link in the show notes. Again, the first 100 people to respond are each going to receive a $20 Amazon gift card.
So tell us about your experience this year. You mentioned that you did a lot of soul searching, you reached out to a lot of different mentors, and you figured out some things that helped improve your application.
Yeah, so I kind of sat down the other day and was just thinking about really the kind of main improvements I made and the main advice I got. If you have any questions on this, you can just go ahead and stop me and ask them while I'm going through this. But there was kind of a few things I came up with. Number one was to really focus on the school list. So the first year around, I applied to 26 schools, and a lot of the advice that I got was, of those 26 schools, I picked too many that were either a little bit too competitive for me or were public schools that didn't really admit many out-of-state students. So, looking back, I think that's something that I should have obviously thought more about and put more time into. But this year, I applied to 30 programs, and I made sure that it was a good mix of public schools and private schools, and just really made sure that this list was schools that I really had a good shot at getting into. So that was the first thing. And in this step, I think my advice to people would be make the MSAR sheet your best friend. So there's this MSAR sheet. You may have never heard of it, but it is, what does that even stand for? MSAR, medical student. I don't know what it stands for, unfortunately, but it's a sheet with all the facts about each school. So it's got, percent of students that are out of state. It's got average MCAT. It's got average scores for all the subsections. And so just go through that, make sure that that's like your best friend.
Okay. And since we are in a digital age, I did a quick fact check, and it stands for medical school admissions requirements.
Nice. Thank you very much. So yes, medical school admissions requirements. So make that your best friend. So that's number one. Another thing, and this is really important, and this is something I should have been focusing on years before the application, was just getting more clinical experience. So this was probably the second most common thing I heard about my application was I just didn't have enough clinical experience. And at the time when I was applying, so this is going back a bit, but I spent 2 years in the DC area. I was working at the NIH doing research out there. And, I thought that was going to be a great activity to be doing. And it was. I mean, I learned a lot, and I think it was good in terms of preparing me for medicine. But I needed to be doing some kind of volunteering or some kind of something else on the side to kind of supplement with clinical experiences, because that is super important. And I think admissions committees really look for that. I got lucky, and I actually was able to volunteer at like a COVID screening center at the NIH while the COVID pandemic was going on. So I couldn't even get into a lab, but I was basically working full time at this screening center. And so it worked in a way that worked to my advantage. But looking back, I should have been doing clinical volunteering, for a year or two leading up to that application cycle. So that is the second thing. The third thing, and this is going to sound obvious, but the essays are super important. I think sometimes those get overlooked. You have this personal statement, you have, 3 or 4 essays that go to each school. And not that I didn't take them seriously, it was more of, the first time around, it was more of kind of just, let me get these submitted as fast as I can so I'm first on the list for that school. I think that was a mistake. I think that in the end, the essays are really important. And to be honest, the whole application is important. Overlooking really any aspect of it, I think, is a mistake. But to me, the essays are the easiest thing to overlook. And I think more on that point, one thing that I did that I think helped me was use your personal statement to tell your story. Tell a story of why, you wanted to go into medicine. My story, I think, was a little more about education and, some of the things I've done in the education space that make me excited about medicine. And through that, I was able to tell about a lot of my different experiences in medicine. So be able to tell a story about, why you want to go into medicine. The first time around, I think my essay was a bit more of just, here's this experience, here's this experience, here's this experience, and didn't really tie everything together with a story. Second time around, it was more story related.
I love those.
And then one more, and this one is another kind of obvious one, but I think one that, looking back, I really regret about the first time around is that, treat every interview as though you're literally going to get one interview. I went in, and this is just probably a bit of arrogance, but I went in thinking, okay, my first interview was with a school that I thought, was maybe a little bit of a safety school. And so I was thinking, I'm going to take this interview as like a practice interview, and this is going to be great for my interviews later on. Well, I ended up only having 3 interviews. And so, I could have really prepared really well for that interview and maybe, gotten into that school. But I, out of probably a bit of arrogance, I didn't do that. So this year, I really focused on, this might be my only interview. And so I really prepared for that and really made sure I know my stuff. And then, went into the interview feeling more confident than I did the year before. And I really did feel like I could really connected with the interviewer a lot better this cycle. And I think that's another important thing, is really just trying to connect to the interviewer. So, upon reflection, those are kind of the main things that just came up in my mind as things that I learned and things that I improved to improve my application this time around.
I think that is an amazing list, and it was full of thoughtfulness and reflection. And I think that it's worth us restating again. So I wrote them down. So I'll
Nice.
kind of restate Sam's 5-point points of application. So number 1, focus on your school list, because that's important. You have to be realistic and look at your stats, because they're all individual, and what you're looking for in a school and what a school may be looking for in you. Number 2, look at that MSAR sheet. Again, that's the medical school admissions requirement sheet, and it can tell you a lot of things about the school. 3, clinical and volunteer experience is important. And I will say that as someone who previously has helped with admissions, both in medical school and residency, and even now in other organizations, that point where you're not doing any work for money that is required, it kind of shows your passion and your drive and why you want to do it. Like, you're showing up there, we want to make sure that you know what you're getting into. So if you're volunteering at doctor's office, you're able to see and engage with different patients. And even if you're not taking care of them, you can evaluate and have some kind of insight as to the demand of the field. And then volunteerism, it just is a part of that altruistic part of medicine where you're giving back to the community. So it could be something formal like the COVID testing that Sam did, or it could be volunteering at a homeless shelter or doing Big Siblings. Some people do Girl Scouts. It's what your passion is. So don't do it just to check off a box, because people can kind of read that as well. But do something that you're passionate about that will actually give you some experience in giving back. Number 4, the essays. I think that is definitely a great point to bring up. Don't breeze through them. I'm sure that the many schools kind of definitely probably looked a lot at your application. That is what gets you the interview, and it's the only way that they can see who you are outside of your scores. So it's your time to shine. So I like to tell people, like Sam said, tell your story. So I use the W. So who you are, what you do or what you did, to why you did it. So like, why did you volunteer for COVID? If you did a story on like how the pandemic affected your life and drove you to want to pursue medicine even more. And what you want to do. So say you want to be an orthopedic surgeon, like why do you want to do it? So they'll know what your passion is, not just I want to help people, because everybody wants to help people and you can help people in different ways outside of medicine. And why should they choose you? So they have thousands of applications. So in that, with your plea, your ending statement, like you're in court, like please choose me, but choose me because I will add this to your school. Yeah. When I'm a graduate of your school, you will blah, 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 blah. I will impact society in this way. So tell them why they should choose you, basically, and shine there. And then number 5, be humble and treat this as your only interview, because you never know. It may be your only interview, or you may, after you go back and get several acceptances, have to kind of make a checklist of pros and cons. And you may think back on that interview and be like, okay, I didn't think I would love that place, but now where I'm at this other school I got an interview at, I think I like this other one more. So always have put your best foot forward.
Yep, definitely. And I should clarify too, just for the listener. So this year I had 7 interviews and none of them were MMI. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, just performance in MMI in general. But I do think that some of these changes I made really did, help. I went from 3 interviews to 7. I think there was something that changed that really did help. So hopefully that gives it a little legitimacy.
That is absolutely phenomenal. I'm going to be really, really, really transparent today and say for medical school, I think I got 2 interviews. So these numbers may sound very small when we think about the number of applications that you send out and how wonderful your package is. But like we are reiterating over and over again, medical school is very competitive, and definitely try to maximize your application and showcase your thankfulness with wherever you interview.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. So one thing we didn't hit on, because I know we're coming towards the end, but we kind of didn't talk about the elephant in the room, as this past year was the pandemic.
Right.
So how did that affect your interviews this year, as we definitely don't know how the fall will look in terms of interviews moving forward?
Yeah. So I think it was fantastic compared, so I was able to go through a year of, non-COVID interviews and then COVID interviews. I think it was fantastic that they did a lot of the interviews, over Zoom. Now, Zoom obviously is not as great as being in person. However, in terms of money that I saved, I mean, it's just, I probably saved $5 or $6 grand. It costs so much to fly to all these places, get hotels, do all the things. Whereas if you could do it all from your office, literally where I'm at now, you save all that money. So I think that this virtual interview is really the way that it's going to be done in the future. And that question was actually asked quite a bit by students at interviews. And a lot of the schools actually said that they're going to stay with this virtual interview format. So I think that's great. But again, it's not, one difficulty of that is that you don't get to see the schools. So, which in a way is fine, because, I don't know what the stats are, but let's say that somewhere around, 10 to 50% of people, depending on the school, that get interviewed get in. So I think it's almost better that once you know where you got in at, that's when you can go visit the schools, and that's when you can see, what the campus is like, etc. And I think that's what some schools are going to be doing, is having second looks that are in person so you can see campus. So I guess my overall take on it would be, hopefully a lot of schools remain with the virtual interview setup. However, it's good to see campus, meet students, meet faculty. So if you have the opportunity through a second look, I totally recommend doing that.
Absolutely. And this is just a question that came off the top of my head, so bear with me if you need to think about it a little bit. With this way of interviewing, did you have an opportunity to connect with the other students who were currently at the schools where you interviewed to kind of have a conversation with them outside of a Zoom?
Not really. That's another problem is, so a lot of the interviews did have like student panels. And so you could talk to some of the students, kind of unfiltered, get to hear what they said, but it wasn't really a one-on-one, and it wasn't really, it wasn't really being able to fully connect. So what I did in trying to kind of choose the medical school that I'm going to go to is just reach out to different students that you can find on LinkedIn or that are friends of friends, and just talk about the schools, talk about the culture, talk about, what the other students are like. I think that gives a better kind of idea of what this school feels like, or what it would feel like to go there as a student.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up that point. So utilize your resources. We're living in a social media, digital age. So once you narrow your list, or if you want more information, those students are living it. So it's very good to talk to someone who is currently in that environment to see what the culture is like, to see if there is camaraderie or very competitive. So there are certain stereotypes for certain schools. So to see what type of environment you would thrive in with your classmates. Like, I know some of my fondest memories from medical school were those times after tests. So in my second year, I think we had exams every 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, about 150 out of the 180 of us were at the bars or at somewhere.
Awesome.
So we had a lot of team building outside of studying and figuring out like what it is like to live in the area. What is the cost of living, and all of those things that may factor into your decision.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely advantages to being in person like that. But I think on balance, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages.
Absolutely. I'm sure with 7 interviews, you may have had to narrow down or something. If it was in person, like they may have been conflicts with time. Right now, you probably can have one interview back to back or the day after, whereas opposed to flying and all of those costs and different things may have been more prohibitive. So definitely pluses and minuses, but I'm glad that we were able to kind of go through some of the reflection of both of your experiences with the interview cycle, and now you come out on the other side. So I'm sure after your first year starts in the fall, I'll have you back and you can tell everybody like, okay, study this anatomy.
I would be happy
we'll grow into like first year basics or something. So it'll be very interesting.
I'd be happy to do that. And one thing I want to say too before I leave is, I'm sure there's some people out there that are going through the same thing. Maybe you applied this cycle and just didn't get in. Go find something cool to do for a year. I got to be a full-time podcaster. I got to live with my girlfriend who's a law student. I don't think I would have got to do that otherwise. There's a lot of good things that came out of not getting in. And of course, that's looking back in retrospect. Now that I have gotten in, I might feel different if I didn't get in again. But, use that time to go do something cool that's going to build up your application, something that you're passionate about and that you're going to love doing.
Absolutely. And life happens when it's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
So if you're meant to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to be okay. So there are definitely people who, like I said, got in the first time. There are people who got in the second time. There are people who have been trying for years and they get in and they may take a break and do another job and come back to it because the passion is still there. I think if you guys listen to one of my episodes a few weeks back where we were talking with Dr. Kat Chamberlain, and she was talking about how she thought about medicine and then she ended up doing like the Peace Corps for like 5 or 6 years and then coming back, and then she had to do her prerequisites. So it took her about 10 years to go to medical school. And now she's thriving. So just because things don't happen on the first attempt or on the timeline that you want them to happen, there are a lot of great things that can come out of it. Like Sam just told you about all of the amazing things that he's been doing this past year. So I'm sure you guys will continue to thrive, and you guys can definitely write us in to Med School Coach or go on our Instagram or even mine or Sam's and let us know what other topics you would like to listen to, or if you would like for us to have another conversation on something, we're definitely listening.
Yeah, definitely. And my I can put my email out there too. If anybody has questions about reapplying or anything like that, I'm happy to answer. And my email is just sam@mcatbasics.com. So again, feel free to reach out. Always happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you so much. It was such a delight to have you talk about this experience today. I think that you were our inaugural guest to say shit. And
Yes, that's what I was going for. That was my goal this whole time.
We'll see what kind of good trouble we get into.
Yeah, right.
So all the listeners out there, definitely click that subscribe button and also subscribe to MCAT Basics if you're still in that process. And I'll see you guys next week.
Yep. See ya. Thank you.
Each episode of MCAT Basics is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access Med School Coach services, including MCAT tutoring and medical school admissions advising, visit our website at medschoolcoach.com. Good luck as you prepare for the MCAT, and we hope you tune in again next time.